The clock on the wall read 11:47 p.m. when Maya pushed her cleaning cart through the glass doors of Hartwell Technologies. The building was quiet at this hour, just the way she liked it. No people meant no awkward conversations, no forced smiles, no feeling like she didn't belong. Just her, the empty hallways, and the soft hum of the air conditioning. She was 24 years old but felt much older. Life had a way of doing that to people who grew up in the system, bouncing from one foster home to another. Maya learned early on that the best way to survive was to stay quiet, keep your head down, and never expect too much from anyone. It was a lesson that stuck with her long after she aged out of foster care at 18. Her supervisor, Mrs. Patterson, had already gone home for the night. That meant Maya could take her time on the executive floor. She pulled out her spray bottle and microfiber cloth, working her way through the offices methodically. Dust the desk, wipe down the computer screens, empty the trash, vacuum the floor. It was repetitive work, but she didn't mind. There was something calming about turning chaos into order, even if it was just cleaning up after people who would mess it all up again tomorrow. The executive floor always felt different from the rest of the building. Everything here was nicer, more expensive. Real wood desks instead of laminate. Leather chairs that probably cost more than she made in a month. Artwork on the walls that she was afraid to touch even with her cleaning cloth. Sometimes she wondered what it would be like to work in a place like this during the day, to wear nice clothes and have important meetings. But those thoughts never lasted long. People like her didn't get those kinds of jobs. As she cleaned, Maya noticed a light still on in the corner office. The CEO's office. Richard Hartwell himself. She'd seen him a few times from a distance, usually leaving late or arriving early. He was older, probably in his 50s, with gray hair and tired eyes. The other cleaners gossiped about him sometimes. They said he never left before midnight, that he practically lived at the office. They said his wife had died a long time ago and he never got over it. Maya understood grief even if she'd never had anyone close enough to lose. There was a different kind of grief in never having someone to begin with. In wondering every day of your life why your parents didn't want you. Why you were found wrapped in a hospital blanket with no note, no explanation. Nothing but a first name that some nurse had written on your paperwork. She quickly finished the hallway and moved on, making sure not to disturb the CEO. The last thing she needed was to lose this job. It didn't pay much, but it was steady, and the night shift meant she rarely had to talk to anyone. That was worth more than money to someone like her. Finally, she reached the large conference room at the end of the floor. This was her favorite room in the entire building. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city, and in the corner, like a beautiful secret, sat a grand piano. A real Steinway. She'd looked up the brand once on her phone and nearly dropped it when she saw the price. This single piano cost more than she'd earned in 10 years. Maya glanced around to make sure she was alone, then carefully pushed her cart inside and closed the door behind her. She cleaned the conference table first, polished the windows, organized the chairs, but the whole time her eyes kept drifting to the piano. She'd discovered it 6 months ago on her first night working this floor. At first, she'd only looked at it, admiring the glossy black finish and the perfect ivory keys. Then one night, unable to resist, she'd lifted the lid and pressed a single key. The sound that came out was so pure, so perfect, that it made her chest ache. Now, after she finished cleaning, she allowed herself 30 minutes. Just 30 minutes to pretend she was someone else. Someone who belonged at a piano like this. Maya sat down on the bench and flexed her fingers. She'd never had a real piano lesson in her life. Everything she knew, she'd taught herself using free YouTube videos at the public library. She'd spent hours there as a teenager, wearing headphones and watching her phone screen, memorizing hand positions and trying to understand music theory. When she was 16, one of her foster homes had an old keyboard in the basement. For the 8 months she lived there, she practiced on it every day until her fingers hurt. Then she got moved to a new home and the keyboard was gone. But the music stayed with her. Especially one melody. It was the strangest thing. For as long as she could remember, there was this tune in her head. She had no idea where it came from. Sometimes she wondered if her mother had sung it to her before leaving her at that hospital. It was the only connection she had to a past she couldn't remember. So she'd spent years trying to recreate it on any instrument she could find. She started playing it now, slowly at first, letting the notes fill the empty conference room. The melody was simple but haunting, like a lullaby that held both sadness and hope. Her fingers moved across the keys with increasing confidence, adding layers and harmonies that she'd worked out in her mind during long bus rides and sleepless nights. As she played, something shifted inside her. The walls she kept around her heart loosened just a little. This was the only time she ever felt truly free. Not Maya the foster kid, not Maya the cleaner. Just a person, making something beautiful in a world that so often felt cold and hard. She didn't notice the shadow in the hallway outside the conference room. Didn't see the man standing perfectly still, one hand pressed against the glass door, listening. Richard Hartwell had been working late in his office when he heard it. The music, the same melody he'd been hearing for weeks now, floating through the walls of his office like a ghost. At first, he'd thought he was imagining it. The mind played tricks when you were tired and sad and spent too many nights alone with your memories. But the music kept coming, always late at night, always the same hauntingly familiar melody. He'd tried to catch the pianist before, but whenever he reached the conference room, it was empty. Only the faint warmth of the piano bench suggested someone had been there at all. Tonight, he'd been more careful. He'd heard the music start and moved quietly down the hallway, his heart pounding in a way it hadn't in years. And now, peering through the glass, he could finally see who'd been playing. A young woman in a cleaning uniform, her dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, completely lost in the music. But it wasn't just any music. Richard's hand trembled against the glass. The melody she was playing. He knew it. It was impossible, but he knew it. His late wife, Margaret, had composed that lullaby 24 years ago when she was pregnant. She'd hummed it constantly, day and night, said it came to her in dreams. She'd planned to record it, to have something special for their baby daughter. But Margaret died the night their daughter was born. Complications during delivery, the doctor said. And the baby. The baby died too, or so they'd told him. That night was a blur of grief and chaos. There'd been a fire in another part of the hospital. Alarms going off, people rushing everywhere. They'd told him his wife and daughter were gone, and something inside him had broken so completely that he'd never bothered to put it back together. He'd never shared that melody with anyone. It died with Margaret. So how was this young woman playing it now? Note for perfect note. Richard felt his legs weaken. He backed away from the door, his mind racing. It had to be a coincidence, just a similar melody. The world was full of songs, and some of them were bound to sound alike. But even as he told himself this, his heart knew differently. That wasn't a similar melody. It was exact. Every note, every pause, every subtle variation that Margaret had added. Inside the conference room, Maya finished playing and sat quietly for a moment, her hands resting on the keys. She checked her phone. She'd been here for 32 minutes. 2 minutes over her limit. Time to get back to reality. She stood up, carefully closed the piano lid, and grabbed her cleaning cart. Tomorrow night she'd do the same thing. Play the same melody that lived in her bones. The only piece of her past that felt real. She had no way of knowing that everything in her carefully controlled, quiet little life was about to change forever. Or that the man standing in the dark hallway, trying to catch his breath and make sense of the impossible, was about to turn both their worlds upside down. Richard didn't sleep that night. He sat in his home office, staring at the wall, replaying that melody over and over in his mind. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Margaret's face, heard her humming while she folded baby clothes and decorated the nursery they'd never use. The melody had been hers, completely original. She'd written it down once on a piece of sheet music that he'd buried with her, so how could a stranger be playing it now? By sunrise, he'd convinced himself he was losing his mind. Grief did strange things to people, even after 24 years. Maybe he'd heard the cleaner playing something else and his tired brain had twisted it into what he wanted to hear. Maybe this was what happened when you spent too many nights alone in an empty house, surrounded by photographs of a life that ended before it really began. But when he arrived at the office that morning, the melody was still there in his head, crystal clear. He couldn't shake it. He tried to focus on work, on the quarterly report sitting on his desk, on the video conference with investors. Nothing held his attention. All he could think about was the young woman at the piano. Around noon, he made a decision that surprised even himself. He called down to security. Tom, the head of security, picked up on the second ring. They'd worked together for 15 years, and Tom was one of the few people Richard actually trusted. "Tom, I need you to do something for me," Richard said, keeping his voice steady. I need to see the security footage from the executive floor conference room. Last night around midnight. There was a pause on the other end. Is there a problem, sir? Did something go missing? No, nothing like that. Just please, I need to see it. 20 minutes later, Richard was in the security office watching the footage on Tom's computer screen. There she was, the young woman in the cleaning uniform, pushing her cart into the conference room. She cleaned methodically, efficiently. Then she sat down at the piano. Can you zoom in? Richard asked, his voice barely a whisper. Tom adjusted the camera angle. The image became clearer. The woman was younger than he'd thought, maybe mid-20s. Dark hair, delicate features, completely absorbed in the music. There was something about the way she tilted her head when she played, a gesture so familiar it made his chest tighten. Do you know who she is? Richard asked. Tom pulled up the employee database. That's Maya Chen. She's been with our cleaning contractor for about 6 months now. Night shift. No complaints, always on time. Seems like a good worker. Maya Chen, Richard repeated softly. The name meant nothing to him, but it didn't matter. He needed to know more. Can you pull up her employment file? Background information. Tom hesitated. Sir, I'm not sure that's appropriate unless there's been an incident. Richard turned to look at him. Tom, please. This is important. I can't explain why, but I need to know. Something in Richard's expression must have convinced him because Tom nodded and pulled up the file. It was thin, very thin. Maya Chen, age 24. No emergency contacts listed. Previous address was a small apartment across town. Before that, a group home facility. Education. High school diploma barely. No college. No family listed anywhere in the system. 24 years old. The same age his daughter would have been. Richard's hands started shaking. Tom, I need you to run a more detailed background check. Not the standard employment screening. I need to know everything. Where she came from, her history, all of it. Tom frowned. Mr. Hartwell, that's pretty invasive. If she found out, she could sue the company. We'd need a legitimate business reason. I'll take full responsibility, Richard said. Please, Tom. I'll explain later, but right now I just need you to trust me. This isn't about the company. It's personal. Tom studied him for a long moment, then nodded. It'll take a few days. Maybe a week if we dig deep, that's fine. And Tom, this stays between us. No one else needs to know. After he left the security office, Richard tried to go back to work, but it was impossible. His mind kept spinning through possibilities, each one more unlikely than the last. He was being ridiculous. Millions of people in the world were 24 years old. The age meant nothing. And the melody? Maybe Margaret had shared it with someone before she died. Maybe she'd hummed it in public and someone remembered it. There had to be a logical explanation. But deep down in a place he'd locked away 24 years ago, a small voice whispered, what if? Meanwhile, Maya was having the worst day she'd had in months. She'd woken up late, missed her bus, and arrived at her day job at the grocery store 40 minutes behind schedule. Her manager had yelled at her in front of customers, threatening to cut her hours if it happened again. She needed both jobs to make rent, to keep food on the table. Being late wasn't an option. By the time her shift ended, she was exhausted and hungry. She bought a dented can of soup with her employee discount and headed home to her tiny studio apartment. The building was old and smelled like mildew, but it was hers. No foster parents, no social workers, no rules except the ones she made for herself. She ate the soup straight from the pot, too tired to bother with a bowl, then lay down on her second-hand mattress. She had 4 hours before she needed to leave for her night shift at Hartwell Technologies. 4 hours to rest and forget about angry managers and unpaid bills and the constant feeling that she was one mistake away from losing everything. But sleep wouldn't come. She kept thinking about the piano, about those 30 minutes every night when she got to forget who she was. Mrs. Patterson had been watching her more closely lately. Yesterday, she'd made a comment about Maya taking too long on the executive floor. Maya needed to be more careful. The last thing she could afford was to lose her night job. Maybe she should stop playing. It was risky, and what was the point anyway? It wasn't like she was going to become a concert pianist. People like her didn't get those kinds of dreams. They survived. They worked. They got by. That was enough. That had to be enough. But even as she told herself this, she knew she wouldn't stop. That piano, that melody, it was the only thing that made her feel connected to something bigger than her small, lonely life. Even if she didn't understand where the melody came from or why it felt like home, she couldn't give it up. 3 days later, Tom knocked on Richard's office door, holding a manila folder. Richard's heart jumped. He'd barely eaten or slept since their last conversation, running on coffee and the dangerous hope that refused to die no matter how much he tried to kill it. "I got everything you asked for," Tom said, closing the door behind him. "Mr. Hartwell, I have to say some of this information is, well, it's strange. I'm not sure what you're looking for, but there are some red flags in her history." Richard took the folder with trembling hands. "Red flags? Not criminal or anything like that? Just inconsistencies, gaps, things that don't quite add up." Tom paused. Maya Chen was found as an infant at St. Catherine's Hospital. No parents, no identification. Just a baby wrapped in a hospital blanket with a handwritten note pinned to it that said Maya. That's it. That's all anyone knew about her. Richard felt the room spin. St. Catherine's Hospital. That was where Margaret had died. Where their daughter had supposedly died too. Tom continued, not noticing Richard's reaction. She went into foster care immediately. Bounced around a lot. The records show she was a quiet kid. Never caused trouble, but never got adopted either. She aged out of the system at 18 and has been on her own since. "What's her birth date?" Richard asked, his voice hoarse. Tom checked the file. March 15th, 24 years ago. They estimated it based on the hospital's assessment since there was no birth certificate. March 15th, the night of the fire, the night Margaret died. The night they told him his daughter was gone. Richard stood up so quickly his chair rolled backward and hit the wall. "Tom, I need you to do one more thing for me. I need you to pull the records from St. Catherine's Hospital from that night. March 15th, 24 years ago. There was a fire in the West Wing. I need to know what happened, how many babies were in the hospital, everything. Sir, those records might be sealed or destroyed. It was a long time ago." "Try," Richard said. "Please, money is no object. Hire whoever you need to hire. Get me those records," Tom nodded slowly. "Can I ask what this is about?" Richard looked at him, and for the first time in years he let someone see the grief he usually kept hidden. "That night. That was the night my wife died. The night my daughter supposedly died. I was told there were complications, that both of them were gone, but I never saw my daughter's body. They said it was better that way, that I should remember her as she would have been. The hospital was chaotic because of the fire, and I was so destroyed by losing Margaret that I believed them." Tom's eyes widened. "You think Maya might be—" "I don't know what I think," Richard interrupted. "But she's the right age. She was found to the right hospital on the right night, and she plays a melody that only my wife knew, a song that was never recorded or shared with anyone." He took a shaky breath. "I need to know the truth, Tom, even if it's painful, even if I'm completely wrong and making a fool of myself. I need to know." Tom stood up and put a hand on Richard's shoulder. "I'll get you those records, whatever it takes." After Tom left, Richard sat alone in his office as the sun set outside his window. Somewhere in this building, Maya was probably starting her shift, unaware that her entire world might be about to change, unaware that the lonely CEO she'd glimpsed from a distance was asking questions that could connect two broken people in the most impossible way. Richard opened his desk drawer and pulled out the only photograph he kept at the office. Margaret, 8 months pregnant, glowing with happiness. They'd been so ready. The nursery was painted, the name picked out. Their whole future stretched ahead of them like a promise. Then one night everything ended, or so he'd thought. Now for the first time in 24 years he allowed himself to wonder, what if it hadn't ended? What if somehow, miraculously, impossibly, a piece of that future had survived? It took Tom 9 days to get the hospital records. 9 days that felt like 9 years to Richard. He barely functioned during that time. His assistant commented that he seemed distracted. His business partner asked if he was feeling ill. He made excuses, canceled meetings, and spent hours staring at his computer screen without seeing anything. Every night he stayed late in his office, listening for the music. It came like clockwork around midnight. That same haunting melody that wrapped around his heart and squeezed. He wanted to go to the conference room to talk to Maya, to ask her 1,000 questions. But something held him back. Fear, maybe. Fear that he was wrong. Fear that he was right. Fear that either answer would break something inside him that was barely holding together. On the 9th day, Tom walked into his office and quietly shut the door. The folder he carried was thick this time, stuffed with papers and what looked like old photocopies. His expression was serious. "You need to sit down for this," Tom said. Richard was already sitting, but he gripped the arms of his chair anyway. "Just tell me." Tom opened the folder and pulled out a document. The night of March 15th, there was a major electrical fire in the west wing of St. Catherine's Hospital. It started around 9 p.m. in the pediatric ward. The evacuation was chaotic. There were 17 babies in the nursery at the time. Richard's mouth went dry. 17. They got all of them out safely. But in the confusion, with the smoke and the alarms and people running everywhere, some of the identification bracelets got mixed up or lost. The hospital's record-keeping system was partially paper-based back then, and several files were damaged in the fire. Tom paused. "Your daughter was in that nursery, Richard. She was born healthy at 8:47 p.m., 3 hours before the fire started. The room tilted. Richard couldn't breathe. But they told me she died. The doctor came to me after Margaret passed and said there were complications, that the baby didn't make it. That's where it gets complicated." Tom pulled out another document. Dr. Peterson was the attending physician. He's retired now, living in Florida. I tracked him down and called him. He didn't want to talk at first, but when I mentioned the date and your name, he broke down, said it was the worst mistake of his career, one that's haunted him for decades. "What mistake?" Richard's voice came out as barely a whisper. "In the chaos of the fire and your wife's death, there was a miscommunication. Another baby girl in the nursery actually did die that night from a heart defect. Dr. Peterson thought that baby was yours. The identification bracelet had been lost in the evacuation. He came to tell you, trying to spare you more pain by saying you didn't need to see the body. By the time the error was discovered several hours later, you'd already left the hospital. You were unreachable in shock and the hospital was in crisis mode." Richard felt tears streaming down his face. "They knew? They knew my daughter was alive and they didn't tell me? It's more complicated than that. By morning, when they tried to sort out the babies, there were still 3 without clear identification. Your daughter was one of them. The hospital tried to contact you, but you'd checked into a hotel and weren't answering your phone. Meanwhile, a nurse noticed one of the unidentified babies had been placed in a bassinet outside the emergency room, separate from the others. She assumed the baby had been abandoned. Given the chaos, she reported it as a foundling." Tom's voice grew quieter. By the time the hospital realized what happened, the baby had already been processed into the emergency foster system, and when they went back to verify which baby was which, the records were so messed up from the fire that they couldn't be certain. They made their best guess based on timing and location. They assumed the baby outside the ER couldn't be yours because yours should have been in the nursery. They were wrong. Richard put his head in his hands. "My daughter has been out there for 24 years and no one thought to tell me. Dr. Peterson said he tried. He called your house 2 days later, but whoever answered said you weren't taking calls. He sent a letter, but it came back undeliverable. You'd already sold the house and moved, trying to escape the memories. By the time he tracked down your new address, months had passed. He convinced himself that maybe it was better this way, that the uncertainty would only cause more pain. He was wrong and he knows it. He's willing to testify to everything if needed." Richard wiped his eyes. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely hold them still. "The baby that was found. Do we know what happened to her?" Tom pulled out one more document. A baby girl, approximately newborn, found wrapped in a hospital blanket outside the emergency room on March 15th. No identification, no family located. A nurse wrote the name Maya on the intake form because it was her grandmother's name and she felt sorry for the baby. The infant was placed in emergency foster care the next day. The silence in the room was deafening. Richard stared at the papers, at the bureaucratic language that had stolen 24 years of his life. 24 years of his daughter's life. "There's one more thing," Tom said softly. "Hospital records indicate that your daughter had a distinctive birthmark, a crescent moon shape on her left shoulder blade. It was noted in her initial assessment before the fire. If Maya has that birthmark, we'd have our answer." Richard stood up abruptly. "I need to talk to her tonight. I can't wait anymore." "Why, are you sure? Maybe you should think about this, plan what you're going to say." "I've waited 24 years, Tom. I'm not waiting another day." That night, Richard couldn't focus on anything. He paced his office, practicing what he'd say. How do you tell someone their entire life might be based on a terrible mistake? How do you walk up to a stranger and say, "I think you're my daughter"? She'd think he was crazy. She'd run, and he wouldn't blame her. At 11:30, he heard the elevator. His heart started pounding. He knew her schedule by now. She'd clean the outer offices first, work her way through the executive floor, and reach the conference room around midnight. He forced himself to wait. Let her clean, let her settle in. Don't scare her by rushing. But every minute felt like an hour. He stood by his door, listening for the sound of the piano. There it was. The first notes of the melody drifted through the wall. That beautiful, impossible melody. Richard stepped into the hallway. His legs felt weak, but he kept walking, one foot in front of the other. The conference room door was closed, but he could see her silhouette through the frosted glass. His hand touched the door handle. This was it. Everything would change after this moment. For better or worse, the truth would come out. He opened the door. Maya's hands froze on the keys. She spun around, her eyes wide with fear. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I know I shouldn't be playing. I'll just—" She stood up quickly, knocking the bench backward. "Please," Richard said, his voice breaking. "Don't go. I need to talk to you." She recognized him. The CEO, her boss's boss's boss. She'd never been this close to him before. Up close, she could see his face was pale, his eyes red like he'd been crying. Her mind raced. She was definitely getting fired. This was it, the one good thing in her life, and she'd ruined it. "I can explain," she started, but the words dried up. What could she possibly say? Richard took a step closer, moving slowly like he was approaching a frightened animal. "That song you were playing, where did you learn it?" Of all the questions she'd expected, that wasn't one of them. I don't know. It's just something I've always known. It's in my head, has been for as long as I can remember." "Always?" Richard's voice was shaking now. "Since you were very young?" Maya nodded, confused. "I know it sounds weird. I can't explain it. It's like a memory, but not a real one. Just this melody that won't go away." She looked at him, really looked at him, and saw something in his eyes she couldn't name. Desperation, hope, fear. "Why are you asking me this?" Richard's hand went to his chest like he was trying to hold his heart in place. "Bixia. Oz, that melody. My late wife wrote it. 24 years ago when she was pregnant with our daughter. She never recorded it, never played it for anyone except me. She said it came to her in dreams." The room spun. Maya grabbed the piano for support. "That's impossible. I don't know your wife. I don't know you." "I've never— what's your birth date, Maya?" "March 15th. What hospital were you born in?" She shook her head. "I wasn't born in a hospital. I don't know. I was found as a baby. Nobody knows where I came from." Her voice was rising now, panic setting in. "What is this? What's happening?" Richard pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely hold it. "I need to ask you something, and I know it's going to sound insane, but please just hear me out." He took a shaky breath. "Do you have a birthmark? On your left shoulder blade? Shaped like a crescent moon?" Maya's blood ran cold. Her hand instinctively went to her left shoulder, even though she couldn't reach the spot. She'd had that birthmark her whole life. Had always wondered if her mother had the same one, if it was something they shared. It was one of the few things that made her feel like she came from someone, belonged to someone, even if she'd never know who. "How do you know about that?" she whispered. Richard's face crumpled. A sob escaped his throat. "Because my daughter was born with that exact birthmark." The nurses commented on it. They said it looked like a tiny moon watching over her. His voice broke completely. "My daughter, who I was told died the night she was born. The night there was a fire at St. Catherine's Hospital. The night everything in my life fell apart. Maya couldn't move, couldn't breathe. This wasn't real. This couldn't be real. There was a mistake," Richard continued, tears streaming down his face. "A terrible, awful mistake. Babies got mixed up during the evacuation. Records were lost. And you were marked as abandoned when you should have been marked as mine." "No," Maya said, backing away. "No, this is crazy. You're crazy. I need to leave." "Please," Richard begged. "Please just let me prove it. A DNA test. That's all I'm asking. If I'm wrong, I'll never bother you again. But Maya, if I'm right—" His voice failed him. She stood there trembling, her whole world cracking apart. The CEO of a major company was standing in front of her, crying, telling her he might be her father. It was impossible. Things like this didn't happen to people like her, but that melody, That birthmark. That date, I don't understand, she whispered. Neither do I, Richard said. But I need to know the truth. Don't you want to know too? Maya didn't go home that night. She couldn't. Instead, she sat in a 24-hour diner 3 blocks from the office, nursing a cup of coffee that had gone cold hours ago. The fluorescent lights hummed above her head, and a tired waitress refilled her cup without asking. Outside, the city was starting to wake up, but Maya felt like she was stuck in a dream she couldn't escape. She'd agreed to the DNA test. What else could she do? Richard had been so desperate, so broken, that saying no felt cruel. But now, sitting alone in this diner booth, reality was crashing down on her. What if he was right? What if this wealthy, powerful man was actually her father? What if her entire life, all the loneliness and wondering and feeling unwanted, had been based on a mistake? Her phone buzzed. A text from Mrs. Patterson asking why she hadn't finished her shift. Maya stared at it, unable to think of a response. How could she explain what had just happened? She couldn't even explain it to herself. The DNA test was scheduled for that morning. Richard had arranged everything with a private lab that promised complete confidentiality and rush results. 72 hours, they'd said. 3 days to find out if her whole life was about to change. Maya showed up at the lab at 9 a.m., still wearing her cleaning uniform. Richard was already there, sitting in the waiting room in an expensive suit that probably cost more than she made in 6 months. He looked like he hadn't slept either. When he saw her, he stood up quickly, nervously. "Thank you for coming," he said. "I know this is overwhelming. Thank you." They didn't talk much during the process. A lab technician swabbed the inside of Maya's cheek, then Richard's. The whole thing took less than 10 minutes. 10 minutes to potentially answer a question that had haunted both of them for decades. "We'll call you as soon as the results are ready," the technician said cheerfully, as if this was routine, as if people discovered long-lost family members every day. Outside the lab, Richard turned to Maya. "Can I buy you breakfast? Or coffee? You must be exhausted." Maya almost said no. Every instinct told her to run, to protect herself from the possibility of more disappointment. But something in his eyes stopped her. He looked as scared as she felt. "Okay," she said quietly. "Coffee sounds good." They ended up at a small cafe near the park. Richard ordered them both coffee and pastries that Maya was too nervous to eat. They sat across from each other, 2 strangers who might be family, neither knowing what to say. "Tell me about the melody," Maya finally said. "You said your wife wrote it?" Richard's face softened at the mention of Margaret. She was musical, always humming or singing. When she got pregnant, that melody just came to her. She'd hum it while cooking, while reading, especially at night before bed. She said our daughter was already listening. That music would be her first language. His voice cracked. "She died less than an hour after giving birth. Internal bleeding they couldn't stop. I never even got to hold them both together. Never got a single photograph of the 3 of us." Maya felt tears burning in her eyes. "I'm sorry. I bought the piano at the office in her memory," Richard continued. "I thought maybe someday I'd learn to play, to feel close to her again. But I never could bring myself to touch it, until I heard you playing her melody. Then I had to know." "I don't remember anything before I was about 3, Maya said. "The earliest memory I have is being in a room with other kids, all of us waiting to meet potential foster families. I remember thinking that if I was really, really good, someone would want me, but nobody ever did." Richard's hands clenched into fists. "If I'd known. If I'd had any idea you were out there, but you didn't know," Maya said gently. "Neither of us knew." They talked for hours. Richard told her about Margaret, about the life they'd planned, about how he'd thrown himself into building his company because he couldn't bear to be alone with his grief. Maya told him about the foster homes, some kind and some not, about teaching herself piano on library computers, about feeling invisible her whole life. The more they talked, the more Maya saw pieces of herself in him. The way he tilted his head when he was thinking. The way his left eyebrow raised when he was surprised. Small things that meant nothing on their own, but together felt like puzzle pieces clicking into place. The 3 days waiting for results were the longest of Maya's life. Richard had insisted she take time off from both her jobs with full pay. She'd tried to argue, but he'd been firm. "Whatever happens with the test, you're exhausted. Let me help. Please." She spent the time in her apartment, too anxious to do much of anything. She cleaned obsessively, reorganized her closet, tried to read but couldn't focus. Her mind kept spinning through scenarios. What if the test was positive? What if it wasn't? Which answer scared her more? Richard called her every day just to check in. The conversations were awkward at first, but slowly got easier. He told her about Margaret's family, her mother who still lived in Oregon, her sister who taught music in California. People who might be Maya's grandmother and aunt, a family she'd never known existed. On the third day, Richard's call came at 2 in the afternoon. Maya's hand shook so badly she almost dropped the phone. "The lab called," Richard said. His voice was strange, tight with emotion. "Can you meet me at the office?" "Just tell me," Maya whispered. "Please." "I can't wait anymore." There was a long pause. Then Richard's voice broke. 99.9% match. "Maya, you're my daughter. You're really my daughter." The phone slipped from her hand and clattered on the floor. Maya sank onto her bed, a sound somewhere between a laugh and a sob escaping her throat. 24 years. 24 years of wondering who she was, where she came from, why nobody wanted her. And all along, someone had wanted her. Someone had been grieving her. Someone had been waiting, even without knowing she was out there to be found. She picked up the phone with trembling hands. "I don't know what to do. I don't know how to feel." "Neither do I," Richard admitted. "But maybe we can figure it out together?" They met at his house that evening. Not the office, not a public place, but his home. It was a beautiful house in an expensive neighborhood, the kind of place Maya had only ever seen in magazines. Richard met her at the door, and for a moment they just stood there looking at each other. Father and daughter, family. "Come in," he said softly. Inside, the house was immaculate but impersonal, like a hotel. Richard seemed to notice her looking around. "I've never been good at making this place feel like a home. It's just been me for so long." He led her to the living room where he'd laid out photo albums on the coffee table. "I want you to meet your mother. Really meet her. And I want to tell you everything about the life we'd planned, the nursery we'd decorated, the future we were so excited for." They sat side by side on the couch, and Richard opened the first album. There was Margaret, young and smiling, her hand resting on her pregnant belly. "This was taken about a month before you were born." She was so happy that day. "We'd just finished painting your nursery yellow because we didn't want to know if you were a boy or girl." She said surprises made life more magical. Maya traced her finger over the photograph. This woman was her mother. She had Margaret's eyes, her smile, her delicate bone structure. "She's beautiful. You look just like her," Richard said, his voice thick with tears. "I should have seen it immediately, but I think I was afraid to hope." They went through the albums together, Richard sharing stories about Margaret, about their relationship, about the excitement and terror of becoming parents. With each story, Maya felt something inside her loosening, a knot she'd carried her whole life finally starting to unravel. But as the evening wore on, a different feeling crept in. Anger. Not at Richard, but at the universe, at fate, at the chain of mistakes that had stolen her childhood. "I could have grown up here," she said quietly. "I could have had a father, a family. Instead, I bounced between homes where I was just a check from the state. Do you know how many times I was told I was lucky just to have a roof over my head? How many times I felt like a burden?" Richard's face crumpled. "I'm so sorry. If I could go back, if I could change it." "But you can't," Maya said, wiping her eyes. "Nobody can. Those years are gone. I can't get them back." She stood up, pacing. "And now what? You're my father, but you're also a stranger. You have this whole life, this company, this world I don't belong in. What am I supposed to do? Just move in here and pretend the last 24 years didn't happen?" "I don't know," Richard admitted. "I don't have answers, Maya. I just know that I lost you once and I can't lose you again. We can take this as slowly as you need. There's no pressure, no expectations. Whatever you're comfortable with." Maya stopped pacing and looked at him. Really looked at him. This man who'd been mourning her since the day she was born. Who'd built a company and a life trying to fill a void. Who'd heard her play his dead wife's melody and dared to hope for the impossible. "I need time," she said. "This is too much, too fast. I need to process this." "Of course," Richard said immediately. "Take all the time you need. But please stay in touch. Call me, text me, anything. Just let me know you're okay." The next morning, the story leaked. Nobody knew how. Maybe someone at the lab. Maybe someone at the hospital who'd been contacted for the old records. But by noon, reporters were camped outside Richard's house and Maya's apartment building. The headline screamed, "CEO discovers daughter alive after 24 years. Hospital mix-up leads to miracle reunion. Abandoned baby was billionaire's heir all along. Maya's phone exploded with calls from numbers she didn't recognize. News vans blocked her street. Someone had found photos of her, posted them online. Complete strangers were commenting on her life, her appearance, speculating about what she'd inherit, whether she was after Richard's money. She locked herself in her apartment, curtains drawn, feeling like the walls were closing in. This was supposed to be private, personal. Now it was entertainment for millions of people who didn't know her and didn't care about anything except the drama. Richard called, apologetic and furious. "I'm handling it. My lawyers are sending cease and desist letters. I'll hire security for you. You shouldn't have to deal with this, but the damage was done." Maya's quiet, invisible life was gone, replaced by something overwhelming and terrifying. She'd spent 24 years wishing someone would see her. Now the whole world was looking, and all she wanted was to disappear. For 2 weeks, Maya didn't leave her apartment. Richard had security posted outside to keep the reporters away, but she still felt trapped. She'd quit both her jobs, not because Richard asked her to, but because showing up to work had become impossible. Cameras followed her everywhere. People she'd never met felt entitled to her story, her feelings, her entire life. Richard visited every few days, always calling first, always respectful of her space. He brought groceries, books, anything she mentioned needing, but there was an awkwardness between them that neither knew how to fix. They were family by blood, but strangers in every way that mattered. "I don't know how to do this," Maya finally admitted one evening when Richard stopped by with takeout. They were sitting on her worn couch, Chinese food containers spread between them. "Everyone keeps calling you my dad, but you don't feel like a dad. You feel like a nice man who's trying really hard, and I feel guilty because I should be happier about this. I should be grateful, but mostly I just feel confused and angry and overwhelmed." Richard set down his food. "You don't have to feel grateful, Maya. None of this is your fault. And I don't expect you to suddenly love me or call me dad or any of that. I'm still figuring this out too." He paused. "I missed everything. Your first steps, first words, first day of school. I can't get those back, and neither can you. All we have is now. So maybe we start there, not as father and daughter trying to make up for lost time, but just as two people getting to know each other." Something in Maya's chest loosened. "I'd like that." They started small. Coffee once a week, always at quiet places where they wouldn't be recognized. Richard told her about his work, about the company he'd built. Maya told him about her love of music, about the books she read, about the small dreams she'd had that seemed impossible before. They discovered they both hated horror movies but loved old detective novels. They both added too much sugar to their coffee. Small connections that felt like tiny bridges being built between two islands. A month after the DNA results, Richard made a suggestion. "Margaret's mother, your grandmother, lives in Oregon. She saw the news. She's been asking about you. No pressure, but would you want to meet her?" Maya's first instinct was to say no. Another stranger, another relationship to navigate. But then she thought about the photographs Richard had shown her, Margaret's smile, and she wondered if her grandmother had that same smile. "Okay, yes, I think I'd like that." They flew to Oregon the following weekend. Richard had offered to arrange everything, first-class tickets and hotels, but Maya insisted on economy seats and a modest motel. She wasn't ready for the billionaire lifestyle everyone assumed she'd jump into. She needed to take things at her own pace. Margaret's mother, Helen, lived in a small house with a garden full of roses. She was 73, with white hair and eyes that looked exactly like the ones Maya saw in the mirror every morning. When she opened the door and saw Maya standing there, she burst into tears. "Oh, my dear girl," Helen whispered, pulling Maya into a hug that smelled like lavender and vanilla. "You're the image of my Margaret. I thought I'd never get to meet you." They spent the afternoon in Helen's living room, surrounded by more photo albums. But these photos showed Margaret as a child, a teenager, a young woman. Maya saw herself in every stage. The way Margaret bit her lip when concentrating. The way she tucked her hair behind her ear. Little gestures Maya thought were uniquely hers turned out to be inherited. "Your mother was musical from the time she could talk," Helen said, showing Maya a photo of a young Margaret at a piano recital. "She played beautifully. Said music was like breathing to her, she couldn't live without it." Helen touched Maya's hand. "I'm so glad you have that part of her." "I taught myself," Maya said quietly. "I always wished I'd had proper lessons, someone to teach me the right way." Helen smiled. "Your mother was the same. Drove her teachers crazy because she'd learned pieces by ear before they could teach her to read the notes properly. She felt music rather than thought it. She paused. "There's something I want to give you." She left the room and returned with a wooden box. Inside was sheet music, yellowed with age, covered in handwritten notes. "This is every piece your mother ever composed. I saved them all. Some are finished, some just fragments of ideas. But they're yours now, your inheritance from her." Maya held the papers with trembling hands. This was her mother's handwriting, her mother's thoughts made tangible. At the top of one page she saw it, the lullaby. Margaret had titled it "For My Little One." Underneath she'd written, "May you always know you are loved." Maya couldn't stop the tears. All these years she'd thought she was unwanted, abandoned. But her mother had loved her, had written her a song, had planned a future with her. It was just that fate had other plans. The visit to Oregon changed something in Maya. She returned to Seattle with a sense of connection she'd never felt before. She wasn't just Maya the foster kid anymore. She was Margaret's daughter, Helen's granddaughter. She came from somewhere. She belonged to someone. But the media attention hadn't died down. If anything, it had gotten worse. Reporters wanted exclusive interviews. Talk shows made offers. Everyone wanted a piece of the miracle reunion story. Richard's lawyers were working overtime, threatening legal action against the most aggressive outlets. "I want to do something," Maya told Richard one evening. They were at his house in the room he'd converted into a music studio for her. A beautiful grand piano, not as flashy as the Steinway from the office, but perfect for practicing. "I want to take control of the narrative. I'm tired of everyone else telling my story. What do you have in mind?" "A concert. One performance. I'll play my mother's music, including the lullaby. I'll say what I want to say on my terms. And then I'm done. No more interviews, no more stories. Just closure." Richard looked worried. "That's a lot of pressure. You don't have to prove anything to anyone." "I'm not doing it for them," Maya said. "I'm doing it for me. And for her. Mom never got to share her music with the world. Maybe I can do that for her." 6 months after the DNA test, Maya stood backstage at the concert hall wearing a simple black dress. The venue wasn't huge, only about 300 seats, but every ticket had sold out within hours. Richard had insisted on keeping it intimate, refusing corporate sponsors who wanted to turn it into a spectacle. In the audience sat Richard in the front row, next to Helen, who'd flown in for the occasion. Margaret's sister was there too, along with cousins Maya was still getting to know. People who were slowly becoming family. Maya's hands shook as she walked onto the stage. The spotlight was blinding, and for a moment panic seized her. This was different from playing alone in an empty conference room. This was real. Hundreds of eyes watching, waiting, judging. Then she saw Richard's face. He was smiling, but his eyes were wet with tears. He mouthed something that looked like, "You've got this." Maya sat at the piano and placed her hands on the keys. She'd prepared a speech, something eloquent about loss and discovery and second chances. But now, with the lights on her and her mother's music in front of her, the words felt unnecessary. "My name is Maya," she said simply, "and this is my mother's lullaby. She wrote it for me before I was born, and somehow, even though I never met her, I always knew it. I used to think that was sad, carrying around music from a mother I'd never know. But now I think maybe it was her way of making sure I was never really alone, that a part of her was always with me." She began to play. The melody filled the hall, that haunting, beautiful tune that had connected her to Richard, to her past, to herself. As her fingers moved across the keys, she felt something shift inside her. The anger and confusion that had weighed her down for months began to lift, replaced by something lighter. Not happiness exactly, but acceptance. Peace. She played her mother's other compositions too, pieces that ranged from joyful to melancholic, each one telling a story. The audience sat in perfect silence, captivated. This wasn't just a performance. It was a daughter meeting her mother through music, sharing her with the world. When she played the final note, the silence stretched for a heartbeat before the audience erupted in applause. Maya stood and turned to face them. Through the lights and the noise, she found Richard. He was on his feet, tears streaming down his face, clapping so hard his hands must have hurt. After the concert, Maya stood in the lobby, accepting congratulations from people she'd never met. A woman approached, older, professional looking. "That was beautiful," she said. "I'm a music producer." I'd love to talk about recording your mother's compositions, making them available. No, thank you, Maya said politely. Those songs aren't for sale. They're just for us. The woman looked surprised but nodded and moved away. Richard appeared at Maya's side. You were incredible. Margaret would have been so proud. Thank you, Maya said. Then for the first time she added, Dad. The word felt strange in her mouth, unfamiliar. But Richard's face lit up like she'd given him the greatest gift in the world. Maybe she had. A year later, Maya was enrolled in a music education program at the local university, not to become a concert pianist, though she still played for pleasure, but to teach. She wanted to work with foster kids, to give them the gift of music that had saved her in so many ways. She'd moved into a small apartment near campus, not the mansion Richard had offered, but a place that felt like hers. Richard visited regularly, and she had dinner at his house every Sunday. They were building something slowly and carefully, not trying to replace the years they'd lost, but creating something new. The piano from the office conference room now sat in Richard's living room, a reminder of how they'd found each other. Sometimes in the evenings they played together. Richard had finally learned some basic songs, and Maya was patient with his mistakes. The media had moved on to other stories, other scandals. Occasionally, someone recognized Maya on the street, but mostly she'd returned to the invisibility she'd once craved. Except now she wasn't invisible to herself. She knew who she was, where she came from, and where she was going. She kept the sheet music from Margaret in a special box by her bed. Some nights, when sleep wouldn't come, she'd take it out and trace her mother's handwriting. May you always know you are loved, the lullaby still said. And finally, after 24 years, Maya did know. She was loved. She had always been loved. It just took a melody, a terrible mistake, and one man who refused to stop hoping to bring that truth to light. The shy cleaner who once played piano in empty rooms late at night had found her voice. And more importantly, she'd found her way home.